Good morning, good afternoon, good evening if you're joining us overseas, or if you're watching on demand, good whatever time you clicked onto this webinar. My name's Josh Straley. Thank you for joining us for today's session, Capturing Every Opportunity, How Salesforce Connected Smart Forms Drive Better Engagement and Conversion. Before we get started today, I'm going to do a couple of housekeeping notes, but first I want to run through the agenda and make sure that you're in the session that you want to be in. Today, after I do my housekeeping and introduce our panel is going to discuss marketing-related topics like forms and campaigns, the role that forms play in campaigns. We're going to be talking about lead capture, challenges, and solutions. And we've got some great expertise on their panel. They're going to walk you through how they've seen organizations struggle with marketing, we'll call them marketing challenges, and what they've brought to bear, both the tools and the strategies to try to improve marketing and eventually solve those challenges. We're going to talk about using data for better segmentation and better insights. And we're also going to talk about where automating workflows like handing off leads to sales teams comes into play when we're talking about forms and CRMs like Salesforce. After that, we will have some time for a live Q&A, and I'll make sure that I've got some resources for you before we leave today as well. Some housekeeping. You are seeing our On24, our webinar platform. And I love its bells and whistles, but because you have a lot of modules, I do want to give you a quick guide around the webinar platform before we get started. All of these windows that you see are resizable, movable. You can play around with them. But if you've left them the way that I've set them up for you, you should see the slides off to the left-hand corner. You'll see myself and our panel right in the middle of the screen. What I want to draw your attention to now is the Q&A box in the left corner. You will be able to get in contact with me during this webinar by putting questions in that Q&A box. I'll do my best to answer them as the panel discussion is going. That's also where I'd encourage you to slot in questions as they come up during the discussion, and we'll get some answers from our panel for you at the end of this webinar. So I'll make sure to give a call at the end of the webinar to ask for more questions. But if anything comes to mind, you have any questions during the actual discussion, get them in there and we'll get them answered. One question that I always get during these sessions that I want to answer right now is, will there be a recording? And since you heard me mention the on-demand audience, yes, the recording of this session will be sent to the email inbox that you use to register for this session. Usually we get it out in about 24 hours, so look for that to hit your inbox sometime tomorrow. There is a resources section, and I will make note of that closer to the end of the session. There are several great links in there, some resources to help you improve your marketing with data collection, especially as it pertains to FormAssembly. And we've got some examples that we'll discuss in this call in there as well, but I'll draw attention to those as we get there. All right. That's enough out of me. I'm going to go introduce our panel today, and I'm really excited with the group that we've brought together. First, I'd like to introduce Dixon Blue. He's a senior account solution engineer at Salesforce. Dixon, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, hello. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. It's nice to have all of you here. Like Josh said, my name is Dixon Blue. My pronouns are he, they, and I am a solution engineer at Salesforce, working specifically with our nonprofit customers, and have been doing solution engineering at Salesforce for about 6 years now, but have been in sort of the broader Salesforce ecosystem for the better part of a decade at this point. So really, really excited to be joining y'all today and to be part of the conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dixon, for joining us. Next, I wanted to introduce Andy Golden, a colleague of mine. Andy, a little background on yourself.
Of course, I win the award for most likely not to be in this panel today. So user of Salesforce since 11, with ISV since 14, and too many Dreamforces to count. It's been a fun ride. So I face partners at FormAssembly, and yeah, just excited to be here and share a couple of stories today.
Fantastic. Thank you for joining me. Next up, Anthony Bright. Anthony, go ahead and give some background on yourself, please.
Hi, Josh. Thanks. As you mentioned, my name is Anthony Bright. I am the CRM technical lead over at the University of Texas at San Antonio. I've been in the Salesforce platform ecosystem for about 5 years. That includes FormAssembly. So I guess one of my main, I would say, goals in this whole conversation and panel is to kind of highlight some of the use cases that UTSA has instilled or established with with FormAssembly and Salesforce.
Yeah, I really appreciate you joining. I'm loving the different industry viewpoints that we've gotten, and higher education has some really interesting marketing challenges and some solutions that I really appreciate you bringing to the call today.
Absolutely.
Last but not least, Matthew. Matthew, go ahead and give some background on yourself.
Yeah, thanks so much, Josh. Hi, everyone. My name is Matthew Hannigan. I'm also a solution engineer on the nonprofit team at Salesforce. I'm on our nonprofit digital engagement team. So I work exclusively with nonprofits on their digital marketing and engagement solutions. And prior to joining Salesforce, I was director of technology solutions at a performing arts and cultural center in New York, where I implemented Marketing Cloud. That's how I got introduced to the ecosystem and came over here, and I work very closely with Dixon. So happy to be on this call with him and everybody else.
Excellent, excellent. I've thrown us all into our Brady Bunch panel today. The way that we're going to format this call is I've got some questions. We're going to hit our topics, but I'm really looking for insights from across, all of our panel's experiences. You guys bring a plethora of different industries that you've worked with, clients that you've worked with, colleges that you've worked with. I'm really looking forward to learning from you today because actually at FormAssembly, I'm a product marketing manager. Marketing and lead generation is my team's kind of focus. And I'm hoping to, learn more about how systems like FormAssembly, Salesforce Marketing Cloud, Data Cloud, how those can work together to make my job easier too. So I think like a lot of the folks in our audience, I'm going to be learning today as well. So our first discussion topic, where I'd like to start today, is forms and campaigns. And I want to start very broad. And from the four of you, where do you see the role of forms? What role do they play in campaigns? I've got an idea of them being the start, but I think there's more to that. And I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I can jump in. I would agree with you. One of the main use cases for UTSA is establishing forms on various sites that they would be embedded on, whether it's somebody navigating to a site for a specific program interest, or if they're navigating to a site for perhaps a campus tour or visit. Our forms are kind of embedded almost everywhere that you could find as a prospective student. And so as a prospective student, that would be the entry into the funnel for recruitment over here at UTSA. However, as you mentioned, Josh, there's an additional role that our forms can play. And we actually have since established, I think it was about a year ago, we have an SSO connection to establish within our FormAssembly ecosystem, which allows our actual current students to access forms, and accessing those forms under an SSO login, which would pull their data from Salesforce, because we have all of our student data linked to Salesforce, current active student data linked to Salesforce. And so that SSO will successfully find that contact record and bring that data to the form, front facing to the form, pre-filling it. And we have a couple use cases for that currently that we fulfilled. We have a one-stop center that basically does triage for a bunch of general student requests, whether it's financial aid or admissions or enrollment. And so we have like a one-stop help form that basically can gather a bunch of, we'll say student inquiries for those use cases. We've utilized FormAssembly to solution a internal business process because we don't have everybody in our Salesforce org. That would be somewhere north of like 3,600 licenses for our Salesforce environment, which would be quite a bit. And so some of the desperate departments that are not in Salesforce, we've actually solutioned a way for those individuals to kind of interact with Salesforce, but through FormAssembly and through that SSO mechanism. And that department that's primarily using that currently is our financial aid department. They assist pretty much everybody, and by everybody, I mean to say every department in the university who is going to be submitting like requests to them for student grants, student work study, student scholarships. And so I would say our use case for FormAssembly is pretty broad. It's not just, prospective student engagement. It's also for other internal UTSA business processes.
Yeah, and I like that. And that's one of the reasons I was very excited that you were joining this panel, Anthony, because beyond collecting those new, call them leads, they're students, and your customer life cycle in a university is much longer than some businesses where, like you would have a multi-year relationship. So, there's that initial request for information form for prospective students and audience. Anthony was kind enough to share an example of one of their request for information forms. You can find that in our resources center. But beyond that, using the forms to continue to engage with the students. I like that. Matt, when we were discussing this before the webinar, you mentioned similar to, well, in a very different vein, that continuing relationship with, call it a lead if we're thinking in a marketing format, but beyond that initial lead capture in a campaign, you mentioned progressive profiling. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think and I mean, it goes right along with what Anthony was just explaining, but, of course, forms play a lot of roles across the course of a campaign, and most often we do think about it at the top of the funnel. But as you're gathering information, you want to start thinking about the importance of strategically deploying that form further down in the qualification process. And as you start doing that, kind of the same thing Anthony was doing with pulling data in from the CRM instance, even if you're not pre-populating data in a form, you know that you've captured somebody's interest. I was at a performing arts center, somebody's interest in classical music. Okay, great. I have that piece of information. I don't need to follow up any more about that thing specifically, but maybe I want to start asking them about, subscriber preferences, or maybe I want to send them away from forms around, political talks or film screenings or stuff, and I want to start channeling them down different form channels based on this progressive profile that I'm building out around them. So I have a more robust understanding of what their affinities are and what content I can start steering their way. So kind of strategically placing those forms throughout that experience, just like Anthony was explaining with his students, is critical in developing this kind of form strategy.
Yeah, that's very interesting. It's re-engagement in both of those scenarios. One, to learn more, and really, with the SSO, it sounds like Anthony's school is also collecting more information in some of those situations. I have kind of a follow-up question here. Like there's a role that forms play in campaigns, but can they improve a campaign? And is there a way to use forms to, improve the lead's experience? And perhaps it looks like those engagement places, maybe, as a marketer, I'm concerned that forms are a friction point for some users. They've got fields that are required to fill out. If I don't know them and I can't pre-fill their information, I need to ask them to type on whatever device they're on. And God help them if they're on something like a video game console or a T9 phone. Like the input mechanism can be pretty bad there. Is there any examples that this panel has seen of reducing that friction? Using forms to actually improve campaigns rather than being a little stop or a gate?
Well, I think, and I'll just answer quickly and then kick it to the rest of the panel, but I think that's always the challenge and that balance that you're trying to strike with forms, because oftentimes the constituent or the end user can experience that as a gate or friction point as well. And I think deliberately creating a strategy around what data points you're asking for. So make sure that whatever data point you're capturing in that form is going to reduce friction down the line, or it's going to be a moment of mutual value for both the end user and you. You're obviously asking that question for, benefit on your behalf, but you need to make sure that even if it is a point of friction, there's a payoff to grease the wheels down the line as you're moving people through the funnel.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. As a form filler outer, sometimes a form respondent, as we call ourselves, when I encounter a field on a form that I don't feel like the company needs, if they're asking me for a phone number and I'm just trying to download an ebook, oftentimes I'll bounce. I will literally leave that page. And so I guarantee you that idea of like a payoff is not just for the organization collecting the information, but as a form respondent, I want to know what the payoff is for myself. What am I getting for the information that you're giving me? You touched on something there, Matt, that I'd like to ask the rest of the group. And Dixon, this might be good for you as a solution engineer. Are there any best practices when it comes to that form construction beyond picking very carefully the information you're requesting? Any guidance that you're giving your clients?
Yeah, so I think that one can be a little bit tricky, right? Because when you're using a form to bring in information, you want to get as much of it as you can for a whole lot of obvious reasons, right? So you know your audience better, you know who these people are, you can sort of more effectively communicate, build relationships with them, move them through funnels, whatever it might be, right? But you do want to be careful that you don't do that so much that people are doing, what you're talking about and being like, oh, this is too much, I'm out. Like, this is ridiculous, right? So I think that a couple of things are pretty important in this process. The first one is to sort of think about and have a very sort of concrete long-term intentionality for the form, which is like, think about why you're collecting the information that you're collecting and what you're going to do with it once you have it. And if you can't like sort of concretely say, I need this data point because, then you probably shouldn't have it in your form. So you can be pretty intentional about what you're pulling from people. And then the other thing that I would say is to use any of the tools at your disposal to make the form as efficient as possible, because you want people to have the best experience going through the form as you can, right? We talked a lot about sort of like the quantifiable benefits of having a good, clean intake form at wherever in the process it might be. But there is also like a qualitative, like, how do I feel about this organization? What kind of relationship do I feel like I'm building with them, throughout the process? Andy and Matt and I actually worked with somebody recently who was using a form to collect a whole bunch of information for races, right? We want people to give us information about races so that we can sanction them. And the form was like 9 pages, and all of the fields showed up no matter what. None of them were pre-populated. And so you can take something like that and you can say, okay, we'll pre-fill the information that we have, so we're not making people redo all of this information that they feel like we should already have. We can also do things like take questions and make them dependent, right? And say, okay, I'm only going to show this series of follow-up questions if you answer this one a certain way. And that's also really helpful for keeping the form clean and keeping it super relevant to the people that are filling it out, right? So those are just a couple examples, I think, of tools that you can leverage to make the forms more efficient. But those are sort of the 2 big things that I would say, right? Is to make the form as efficient as possible and to have a very concrete idea of why you're collecting the data points that you're collecting when folks are filling the form out.
Yeah, I love that. And, I hear echoes of that focus on the experience of the form respondent from actually all of you, from Anthony's point of view, like, hey, once I know this student, let's use the information we already have anytime they're filling out a form with SSO. Once we know somebody, let's collect different information throughout the campaign so that they don't get sick of filling out the same form over and over. I appreciate that. Working in technology and with technology, user experience becomes so important. And that's true of the many technologies that we see kind of embedded in websites like forms. Let's move on from strictly forms. As a FormAssembly employee, I care a lot about forms, but as a marketer, I care about marketing too. And I want to talk about some of the challenges that we see out in the market today in 2024. I think a lot of you are uniquely situated in your various roles and industries to talk about that. So let me I'll probably start with the solution engineers on the call again. What are you seeing marketing teams struggle with when you're working with your clients, especially when it comes to lead data?
Well, I think what I see most often, and this is and it's kind of following the theme of the call, so much less about technology and more about strategy. Because a lot of times we have the technology there, but what we're missing is a deliberate strategy around what data is being captured and then acted upon. So either the wrong or not enough data is being captured. If it is being captured, we're then often lacking a coherent communication strategy for acting on that data. I can't tell you how many times people say, well, we need a lead scoring solution, and this is how we want to lead. Well, how are you acting on those lead scores? And it's either a blanket lead score across a bunch of different types of constituents or accounts, and then you don't have the marketing bandwidth to really delineate between different types if the kind of data exists. So regardless, we might be capturing data, but everything just ends up in a kind of default batch and blast funnel, and any granularity is lost. Because the marketing team, somebody's yelling at them that the reason the growth is down is because you're not sending enough emails. So marketing is just like, I'm just going to send as many emails as we can. So I think it's sometimes the strategy around collecting and capturing data is missing. And then other times, if it's not missing and we're capturing that data, then the marketing strategy is kind of falling down behind it.
Mm. Yes, as a marketer, I definitely have heard similar. I don't want to call them accusations, but calls that like, hey, could we be doing more? Could we be engaging more? And the answer is probably yes, but there should be a strategy to it, because nothing is worse than just sending more emails out. As we all know, our inboxes are about to be flooded with Thanksgiving deals and Black Friday deals for the rest of the month. That's fantastic, Matt. Anthony, I don't want to limit this from you, because in your role, from my understanding, you almost serve as a solution consultant with some of the teams at your university. What have the marketers struggled with at University of Texas, San Antonio?
I would say the biggest struggle over here is the quality of data at times. And so, because we have our forms kind of embedded almost everywhere, you can definitely get individuals who will submit a form as, we'll say, Tony Bright, and they'll use an email, and then they'll fill out another form for maybe attending an event, and they'll use Anthony Bright, and that data coming into our Salesforce org has to be consolidated. So I would actually say it's a good problem to have, where you have such a high influx of data points from various forms that are embedded, and just kind of consolidating that data, because one of the issues that we do face is duplicate creation of data in our Salesforce instance. That would probably be one of the main things we struggle with. In terms of the actual, I would say, marketing funnel and pipeline, we're pretty intentional in terms of how we outreach to those individuals that do fill out, either it's an RFI form or it's an event registration form. We kind of do our segmentation, as we obtain that data. So if I fill out an inquiry form for fall 2025 and I'm interested in mathematics, that'll fall into a very specific pipeline within our marketing cloud org, which our marketing cloud administrator is completely responsible for. But those follow-ups, where it'll either push them for submitting an admissions application or submitting their FAFSA, or if they're interested in attending an event, or if they're trying to push them to attend an event, they'll send out email communications that will basically contain within it a link to a form or event registration specific to, let's say, that program. And when they click on that link, because it came from the marketing cloud side, it'll have it's not necessarily SSO, but it's using parameter passing to essentially pre-pop that data. So kind of what you were mentioning earlier about struggles with, data in terms of getting, required touch points or required data, but not making that experience a hassle for the end user. One of the ways that we've alleviated that outside of SSO is that parameter passing. And through Marketing Cloud, we're able to pull essentially like a hash ID. We have a hash ID per contact record. And that will pre-pop, we'll say, their basic contact information, and then the only thing left for them to do is either select a date and time, and maybe how many individuals they're going to bring with them to the event. So it captures those additional touch points that are required for, let's say, an event registration, while not having them burdened with the fact that they would need to provide additional information, but allowing them to verify and validate, okay, this is me filling out this form through that pre-fill.
Yeah, well, that was a challenge and a solution.
Yes.
Well, and maybe we didn't quite get down to the deduplication, but hey, how can you make it easier for your respondents? Do the work for them. Pre-fill with the known data that you have. I like that a lot. Andy, I think you've been telling me about some really interesting solutions to some bigger problems. And I know, we got to be careful about the customer names that you talk about, but you had some really interesting use cases that I thought sounded like unique 2024 solutions to unique 2024 problems.
So I'm a sports fan, and I'm a dad of 3 girls under 9, and my wife and I are sports fans. So painting the picture of going to any type of game. We live in the Pacific Northwest. Let's say it's a Mariners or it's a Seahawks game, right? So a marketer, they're going to be like, hey, this is a first time Andy and his family have ever been to the stadium. What do we do with them? How do we get any information from them? Where did they sit? What kind of selfies? What kind of food? So one of our customers was trying to create more of a first fan experience touch point. And the concept they had was, how do I get someone who's come for the first time on a Sunday afternoon, beautiful, Seattle, to come back, to consider season tickets, to consider merch, to consider birthday parties? Well, this specific group, it's an NFL team who puts Jumbotron QR codes up various times of the day, alerting first fans to look up, grab their phone, take a quick survey. That's just the tip of their engagement spear, if you will, because after the fact, you might end up with a text message promo. You might end up with a Facebook. You might end up with an email, bringing you back with, discounts for your kids' sweatshirts, whatever it might be. So in that specific example, they needed game time. See there what I did with the game time ready data, like real-time data, and they put it in a place where you're already going to be looking, where you're already going to be at, where the fan, if you will, or the audience is quickest to engage, quickest to provide that, immediate, input. So I found that really inspiring. There's a couple of my partners that are building those types of examples with their other, sport team or other types of experiences. I love that story.
Nice. No, that's very exciting. And not that we didn't have Jumbotrons in we'll say 2004, but those engaging experiences in these mass markets, those are what marketers are really trying to gather now, right? And it's like, how do we get people, to have fun while engaging with your brand? I thought that was really interesting. One thing that I, as a marketer, am really in tune with right now is personalization. It feels like the push is, we've got all this data around the leads and our customers. How do we prove to them that we do know who they are, even though we have to run them through a form sometime just to get, that conversion point? Have you seen any, unique solutions or tools to help personalize experiences with the brands you worked with?
Is this generally to the group?
It's generally to the group. This is a big question, and I know it's tough. I mean, we have some data. Pre-population helps, right? It's like, hey, you've given this to me already. I could at least fill in this form halfway for you. But have you seen any other unique solutions beyond pre-population or pre-pop, which is a term I love?
Yeah. So there are 2 things that I'll call out, not to be too shameless about it, but I'll be shameless. Is both Marketing Cloud personalization and or Data Cloud platform offer a very detailed, real-time, talking under 30 milliseconds, web tracking SDK that is going to start, drop a beacon on a first-party cookie beacon on a browser whenever an anonymous visitor hits the site. So it's going to start tracking every click, every scroll, every browse. So even when you prior to you getting them to the point of filling out a form, there's a lot of signal that happens before they get to that form. And both Data Cloud's the same SDK, so both Data Cloud and Marketing Cloud personalization allow you to take advantage of all of that signal. So as soon as somebody converts and you have an identifiable piece of identifiable information on them, you can start to understand their affinities, where they spend time on the site, what kind of content they're more likely to consume. So you can start building out this robust profile that marries all of this, what was heretofore anonymous data. You can stitch that now to their identity. And then we can start doing some really cool stuff around customized web experiences, which we can even do on an anonymous user. If we know that they came from an SEO ad, we can do some cool website personalization experiences around that. And then into the rest of the marketing, whether it is tricking out that form with some personalized content because we know what that experience is leading up to it. And then, of course, down through the customized or the dynamic content that you present to them around their persona throughout the digital marketing process.
No,
Yeah,
that's
I want to tack on to that because I do think that what Matt's talking about is really, really amazing, especially in terms of like stitching all of this information into kind of an anonymous person's identity. And then like Data Cloud actually takes that sort of one step further even. And I think like Anthony, you even mentioned this a little bit earlier in the call, right? Talking about, oh, somebody engages with us as, you know, Dixon Blue at this point, but D Blue at this other point and JD Blue at this other point. And now we have 3 separate instances of a person, even though they're all the same person. And what Data Cloud will actually do is take all of that information and do something called identity resolution, where it takes all of those instances, acknowledges and realizes that they are in fact different instances of the same individual, and then synthesizes them into one, what we call unified profile, right? And so now we have a single view of who this person is in all of the varying capacities in which they're engaging with us. And it really helps like deepen and enrich the tapestry of who these people are. And then we can use all of that information to more intelligently segment or more intelligently engage, right? Or to, you know, leverage Data Cloud to calculate insights about individuals or groups of people that we might not have been able to make before, right? So like doing that with anonymous data is also really important, but I also think that it is really important to be able to, you know, take all of the sort of differing instances of people and be able to recognize, hey, these are all the same person. And what does it look like for us to look at them all as sort of one entity as opposed to 7? And that does help, not completely, but a little bit with the data duplication problem as well. So
yeah, well, I mean, you know, it sounds like not just squashing all of those different contact records into one, but also bringing that different data and telling the full story of the contact record. Very interesting. I think that segues really well into our next topic, actually, Dixon. And you might want to thank you for that. Great segue. Great segue. You know, and you might want to, this might be something that Data Cloud can help with, but, you know, the question is how can, now that we've got, you know, we've gone through forms, right? And we've talked about how we can use forms and different tactics to improve user experiences, to make data collection personalized. Once we have the data, how are we able to better segment now than we were before? Like what are the tactics that we can use? Because even with Salesforce, you know, we're a Salesforce-driven marketing team here at FormAssembly. It can be difficult to accurately segment. And to Matt's point earlier, it's so difficult for me to tell what certain people, what kind of content they like to engage with. You know, we produce ebooks. I'm obviously a part of webinars. It's so difficult to decide, how do people like to learn? How do people like to, you know, use their time when they're browsing content? Have you seen any, you know, new tools or tactics around like segmentation with any of the tools that you use?
Well, if we're talking about tools, like I think Marketing Cloud itself is data agnostic. You can connect a lot of data to it. But I think just following on the through line of Data Cloud and again, you're connecting all of your organization's multiple data sources and harmonizing that data into one consistent, persistent, always on data model. And then you start developing this data model where you have all of your, kind of one-to-one direct data attributes related to the individual, but then you have all of the relational data. So you have your individual understanding, that unified constituent profile, but below that you have all of the transactional data, all of the behavioral data from across the organization, whether that's coming from a Salesforce instance or an event platform or an enterprise data warehouse. You can connect all of this, and now you have all of your organization's data sources available for segmenting. So that's the tool. I'm going to be a little bit annoying and kind of come back to the strategy part of it, because I think a lot of times where I see this fall down is, again, I have this segmentation tool, but what is my strategy behind that? And I think one of the things that we've been doing, we've been taking it on the road, to our Salesforce towers. We're also going to do this virtually, so I'll kind of follow up with Josh with some resources later. But we have this persona and journey mapping workshop where we start with identifying what the constituent life cycle is for each organization, or maybe there's multiple within an organization, and then identifying each stage in that life cycle. So if it's basic one that we're all familiar with, it's awareness, onboarding, engagement, retention, and then advocacy, and then identifying the moments that matter within each stage of that life cycle so that you're moving them through. And then so once you define what those moments are, then you define the data you need to create the audience to deliver that message. So again, kind of putting pen to paper and kind of sketching out what that persona and then what the journey is to speak to that persona is invaluable for identifying, because you can have the tool, but you don't have the strategy. So having both is critical.
Not annoying at all. I think that's great advice. One question, and this is a pullback from Data Cloud a bit. Every organization's lead record looks a little bit different, because every organization is focused on different portions of, different industries, like students, grade level, all of that. Is there anything that you would suggest to improve segmentation at the lead level? Any like specific field you'd add, or is it entirely based, is it entirely custom each time, or is there something that a lot of organizations could benefit from just by adding like a single field? And I know that a silver bullet question is always well, no. It's always like, but I just, when I have experts on the call, is there something that you feel like you see so often missing from object records?
No, I mean, it's a really hard one to answer, and I hate to do it depends, but it kind of depends, and what the objective for that lead is, and are there different types of leads that should be segmented or acted upon differently within the organization. So I think, I don't know. I'm going to tap out, and I'm going to kick it to Dixon to see if there's anything that he sees on the lead records.
I'm giggling over here because I do think that it depends is probably the favorite answer of both solution engineers and lawyers, and that can be occasionally infuriating. But I do think Matt brings up a really important point, right? Which is like, okay, to what end are you intaking this information? Right. And I think it's really important. So I don't necessarily have a silver bullet answer, like put this field on here. But from a strategic standpoint, I do think that it is really wise to begin with whatever the end in mind is. Right. And to have a very, very specific goal of like, OK, if we get this information, like we're going to segment people based on X thing so that we can then whatever it might be. Right. So, like I'll go back to the racing example that we used earlier. This organization also has memberships, right? So knowing the tier of membership for these individuals is supremely important, because they then want to sort of moves management them along to encourage them to upgrade membership tiers, renew memberships, things like that, right? So in their case, acquiring new and retaining current members are the two big sort of like end games of this process. And so they need information that's going to enable them to do that better. So yeah, there's not like one specific answer. Like if you have this field, everything will be amazing. But if you have a very concrete and specific idea of what you want to do, then I think that makes reverse engineering the, okay, what information do we need to be able to make that happen question a lot easier to answer.
So let's talk about how people find those answers and how they establish that strategy. Dixon, you informed me of something last week that I found really fascinating. It was data cloud related. And, Einstein, and correct me if I'm mislabeling the products, but Einstein AI could look at, data in your data cloud or your data lake and start to identify trends and kind of like help marketers discover which attributes, or if we get to the data level, which fields actually start to matter more for certain outcomes. And that was fascinating to me. You could probably explain better than I butchered right there.
Yeah, I think there's sort of like a couple of different answers to that, right? Like you can in fact use Data Cloud to, and the part of this that's really important is what Matt was talking about earlier, which is plugging in all of the different data sources for your organization, right? Regardless of whether they're CRM or event management tools or data lakes or whatever they might be, right? Plug them all into Data Cloud and bring all of that information in, synthesize all of that into unified profiles so that we understand like the whole complexity of an individual, but we understand them as an individual. And then we can make metrics or get suggested by Data Cloud metrics that will help us understand these people better, right? And then we can do really fun things with that. We can do segmentation or personalization attributes, or we can take those insights and surface them like onto contact records inside of Salesforce, right? So if I'm not on the marketing side, but maybe I'm on the sales side or I'm on the development side, if we're talking about nonprofits, right? That information is really invaluable to me as someone who is, building a relationship with someone, like maybe going to eventually ask them to give money to our organization, make a donation, make a big donation, right? It helps me to have all of these understandings of who these people are, right? And so you can use tools like Data Cloud to do that. You can use other tools like Einstein Data Discovery as well, which is sort of an AI-driven tool that Salesforce brings to the table to basically like pick and choose what data points you think are going to be important, and then analyze how other data points influence that one, right? So if the thing I'm looking at, for example, is like, how likely is this person to become a recurring donor for my organization? Okay, here are all the things that I think might be relevant to that. How often do they go to our website? Are they opening our emails? Are they coming to events? Are they volunteering? Things like that. And then data discovery might tell me that, hey, if people are volunteering, that's the single most important influential factor to whether or not they're going to be a recurring donor. So now I know that, and I can be like, okay, now my goal is get people to volunteer. Because if I get people to volunteer, that's going to be the biggest influence on getting as many recurring donors as possible. So those are just like a couple of examples of using tools to get insights out of the data or get the data to work for you, right? Not all of us are data scientists. We need the tools to do a little bit of work for us sometimes. So those are just some examples of how people are doing that. And I don't know, I think it's really cool. All this stuff is really exciting.
That is super exciting. I mean, there might not be a silver bullet field that we can all add to a contact record, but we can.
Would that there was, Josh. Would that there was.
With some tools, we can identify the silver bullet for our own industry or for our own business. And that's what's so exciting. I hate to use the marketing acronyms, pardon me, but KPIs. Every marketing agency is going to say, hey, the KPIs are a lead, an MQL, an SQL, an SAL. We've got a million of those acronyms, but it's so difficult to tell which one is really where, which one's the log jam in my funnel, which one's going to unlock, like an amazing quarter for us. And the more data is out there, the learnings are probably there, but the more we collect, it does feel like we do need data scientists, even on the marketing side, just to root through there to identify those trends. But maybe AI is going to save us marketers from having to actually learn to be data scientists, because many of us got into marketing to avoid math and anything we can do to keep out of that. One more question before we move on to automating, and I appreciate all of your time today, is before we get that information into our CRM to unlock those insights, there's, marketers are very focused on that experience at the top of the funnel. Why are the anonymous visitors on my website not filling out my forms? Who are these people? Et cetera. Andy, you had an example that we discussed about someone, trying to answer that question about somewhere in their forms or their application process. They were like, man, we need to improve this at the question level of a form. How did they go about doing that?
Yeah, this was a global foundation that specifically was soliciting responses from folks that they had, given money to, and they wanted to be able to tell the story of the community development, the science fund, the water treatment, the whatever it was that the output was of that funding. And they were using, sort of A/B testing, if you will, or even at a form level, question level analytics to say, hey, what's the quality this month of this specific question? Do we like the answers? Do we need to tweak it for next month? And doing some of that in real time, adjusting because maybe the answers they were getting, weren't as full or as rich as they needed them to be, and required maybe another manual follow-up step or a conversation when the form could be changed or the segmentation could be tweaked just a little bit just to have a little bit more of that richness come back to them without, manual intervention. This might be hundreds of different recipients, thousands of recipients. So at the tooling level, how do you make that smarter for you? I think that was maybe the intent of the question. Let me know if I didn't get that one.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There are, like with Einstein Data Discovery, there are tools to help look further up the funnel. Even at the form level before you capture the information, you can, if you're trying to reduce the friction, if you're really struggling with the question of why are my landing pages not converting, there are tools out there. FormAssembly has some. We call them form analytics, where you can see bottleneck fields, but that enables these marketers to kind of again, we're not data scientists, but we've got a hunch often where it's like, oh, someone seems to be having a trouble with this form. Mm-hmm. The data is out there even before the submit button is hit at times, which is really great to hear as we go and we try to improve our funnel. So quickly, because we are running out our hour, this has been a great conversation. I want to touch on something that's super important, and it's kind of like the handoff from a marketing team to a sales team. Handing off qualified leads is the point of so many marketing teams, at least ones that work with dedicated sales teams. My question to this group is, looking at the data that you collect or have helped marketers collect, how have you seen it best handed off to sales teams? What does that, look like? What automation do you bring into play? How do we make, this is where the goal is for marketers. How have you seen that made successful?
Yeah, that's always an interesting one, right? And I think there's some sort of inherent friction between those two teams about we're giving you these really good leads from the marketing side, and then sales doesn't think they're as good or whatever, right? So my take is that those two teams need to be kind of in cahoots with each other to figure out from a marketing side, what do we need to give these people that they actually want that's going to help them do their job better, right? So have good teamwork going on is sort of the first take. And my second take is to automate as much of that process as humanly possible. You want to take out any of the sort of manual process that's involved, because you don't want people to have to deal with that. You don't want there to be time lags. You don't want you try and remove as much of the possibility for like human error and human tarrying as much as you can, right? So there's plenty of workflow automation tools that are natively built into Salesforce you can use to do that, which are great, even between Marketing Cloud and and CRM. And then to loop this back around to forms as well, there's plenty of opportunity to take the information that you collect in a FormAssembly form and use it to either feed into objects that already exist, or to make objects specifically, right? So to feed in custom objects and then relate them to whatever they need to be related to. So automate as much of it as humanly possible. And I would be curious to hear what some of the other folks have to say as well.
Yeah, Matt, you had a great point when we discussed last week about a warm handoff and an overlap, which is something as marketers we often try to avoid with the sales process, where we're like, here, they're your problem now. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I think, and Dixon kind of said it, like, you want to have that kind of handshake, right? And one of the things that we do is we have this, Journey Builder is a great way for you to design a communication cadence for your leads and kind of gauge the level of engagement. And as engagement, with automated emails starts to build on a particular contact, and that lead score reaches a certain threshold, then at that point within the Journey Builder tool, you can create a task that launch it, or Journey Builder can launch a task into the CRM to say, hey, salesperson, you need to pick up the phone. Hey, major gift officer, you need to pick up the phone because now this is a lead that I've warmed for you. But sometimes that doesn't happen, and there can be a lack of engagement from the sales side. So you want to kind of maintain what is happening on that contact record post creation of that task. And if there isn't any follow-up, if there isn't any engagement on the record itself, then let's keep them going on that journey. Don't exit them from the journey once that task is created. If they maintain at a certain level, let's kind of re-engage them on our automated workflow, and maybe have that pop an alert on, a reminder on the sales side. So I think it's just a very, you need to create a thoughtful way of passing that over and not just a hard line between the two teams.
No, I like that. And, to echo your point, if I'm being annoying, some strategy when it comes to that handoff is going to go a long way. Anthony, I want to circle back to the higher ed component here. I think you don't have sales teams. What does a lead handoff from your marketing team look like? I'm fascinated by that.
That's a good question. I would actually say that a comparative example, at least in our higher ed space at UTSA, would be admissions advisors. So individuals that help our prospective students apply for admissions, fill out their FAFSA, answer any questions before they actually become admitted to UTSA, or to help them become admitted to UTSA. In terms of most likely what that looks like, because I can speak more to a technical standpoint, but like the actual breakdown between the automated marketing processes that we have with Marketing Cloud and the hands-on kind of, we'll call it sales process with our admissions advisors, I would say it's actually kind of an overlap strategy, which might not be the best. But that's mainly because of the fact that we have such our prospect to admissions advisor ratio is massive. We take in quite a bit of prospective data. And so there are journeys within our Marketing Cloud platform that will consistently outreach to an individual, even once they've been admitted, to make sure that they get to that enrolled stage, because that's truly considered what is a win for us at UTSA, is once they actually become enrolled in classes. And so it's kind of a unique scenario, because our admissions advisors will help to a certain point, but then there's a certain point where they kind of fall outside of that that individual's purview of outreach, and they could technically be later on down that funnel. So there's a bit of an overlap where we have some physical touch point from an individual and admissions advisor, usually occurring, I would say, if you were to kind of draw a beginning and end to a funnel for a prospective student, they would be kind of somewhere in the middle towards the later half, and then they kind of drop off towards kind of like that end point where we're just kind of pushing them for enrollment.
Yeah. Well, I think that's actually more applicable than I expected it to be, because, there are plenty of products out there that see similar, more leads than a sales team can handle, and a multi-stage kind of customer engagement where they may need to take an initial step like an application and be admitted, but then there's a furthering of that relationship, and a possible additional sale where marketing can step back in and, automate experiences and outreach, as you mentioned. No, that's very interesting. But don't let me denigrate, higher education. Obviously, education is very important. It's not a simple sale, and your admission advisors make that clear. Great. I do want to wrap up. I want to leave a couple minutes for questions. So if, audience, if you have any questions for our panel, get them in now. We're going to give them a moment to add any questions in. Dixon, I know you've been reaching out to some people who have specific questions. Really appreciate that. Before we jump into Q&A, or if we don't have any live questions, any last thoughts from the panel today? Any suggestions for marketers? I mean, we've gotten some great advice, and I really appreciate all of your insights. But anything you want to leave the audience with today?
Well, I'll jump in and I'll just say, I will plug that journey mapping workshop. It's actually the first time I ever did that was when I was a Marketing Cloud customer, and when I was running the change management and the adoption at my organization. So helpful for adoption, but then also helpful for understanding how you really want to deliberately and thoughtfully create your digital marketing practice. So that kind of like covers from, everything from top of the funnel and forms to the emails to that pass off to sales, everything that we talked about. So if there was one thing that I would plug, it would be going through that process, and we can do it for you. If you have a Salesforce account exec, we can do it one-on-one. You can join one of the things that we do in the towers or do virtually. So that's the one thing I would plug.
Great. Any other thoughts? All right. Well, if I had to sum up things, it's definitely have a strategy when it comes to your data collection. And, like as this group kind of like puts out there are tools to help with that strategy and make that strategy easier, whether it be, Einstein, forgive me, it's data clouds. Dixon, help me out here. Data discovery, whether it be the data discovery tool, and to be clear that that is a Salesforce product available in Tableau, as one of our audience members asked. Whether it be form analytics, if you're looking to answer questions about those forms, that's available in FormAssembly. There are software tools out there to help marketers. And our goal today was just to raise awareness of how we can bring strategy, which is non-software related, and the tools at your disposal, and improve our marketing efforts and make them a little bit easier too. I really appreciate the time that the panel has spent with me today. I want to thank you each, for the time and the insights. And as a marketer, I've learned a lot. I want to thank our audience for attending today. Thank you so much for showing up. Before I let you go, we do have some resources for you. If you're interested in FormAssembly, you can find a demo link, but there are some new ebooks and checklists from my own marketing team that can help how you think about data collection in your marketing efforts. Take a look there. There was also an example of a request for information form for prospective students that Anthony shared. Take a look in the Resources Center for both of those. And if you're interested in any of the tools that Dixon or Matthew mentioned, take a look online. Salesforce is everywhere, thank goodness. And if you've missed Dreamforce, you can always come back to that as well. Do look for the recording of this webinar to hit your inbox in about 24 hours. Give me about 24 hours. We'll get an email out to you, and you'll be able to watch this session and send it to any coworkers. With that, I'll give the panel a chance to say goodbye, and we'll sign off for today.
Awesome. Thank you, Josh, and thanks everyone who came.
Thank you, Josh.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Josh.
Likewise. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.
Y'all have a good one.